Better late than never, it's time to do that December reading wrap up. I didn't get a lot of reading done this past December because I was working on the massive Plated Prisoners project, which should have released a couple days ago, and also because December is just a really busy time. I think you're going to find a lot of these books are pretty fluffy and insubstantial, mind popcorn or like light entertainment, and not really looking to do any too intense deep dives this season. Starting with our 3-star reads. Gold by Raven Kennedy. This book kind of confused me. The highs are real high, but the lows are so low. I was pleasantly surprised by how much I was enjoying Oren's time in Anwin, but it was still so long. And also, it sort of reinforced to me that Oren is not a very smart cookie. The whole like Orion showing up in Anwin when they hadn't before, and her not like putting two and two together way earlier in the story was very frustrating to me. And granted, as a reader, I had a lot more pieces than she had of the puzzle, but there were a couple of like easy tip-offs that should have made it pretty obvious who these new Orions were and what she was gonna find when she got into that manor that just totally went past her. And to talk just about Oren here in this review would be unfair because it just is one small part in a massive story. I wanted so much from Melina starting in book 2 when we got her perspective, finally seeing that redemption arc, but the fact that she has gone so like heinous and malicious and awful for so long to make this rapid transformation with this unearned relationship that's happening in grossly inappropriate times was really frustrating and off-putting to me. Slade continues to be like an awful baddie, and I think he's supposed to be like really dark and brooding and shadowy. I'm not into this massive revenge payback arc that's happening all across Aurea. There's parts of it that are satisfying because a lot of these people have gone on doing whatever they wanted way too long and deserve punishment. But the fact that like Slade is just going into places, messing shit up, and not really like dealing with all the fallout and the reconstruction, all the people he's put out of work or livelihoods or homes, that part felt kind of gross to me. Like he doesn't understand the fundamental issue of what's happening and how many people are relying on that even if they don't want to. So like I'm just imagining Oren, for example, still in Dufert City working for Zakir. Some guy like Slade comes by, destroys the East and the West, and yes, he's quote unquote freed Oren or people like her, but he's also left them destitute with nowhere to go, nothing to do. It's not a good situation for them. He has improved literally nothing. That said, I am pretty excited for like the last standoff in Aurea. I think the Fae as a threat marching through and this being their last chance to stop it is pretty compelling and interesting. I'm not into how Oren's arc ends and what that foretells for us in Goldfinch, but I wasn't really excited for Oren's travels through Anwin, and I ended up liking them enough to put this at 3 stars. Maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised in the finale of this book as well. Next is The Inheritance of Hunger books by Kathryn Moon. Specifically book 1 and book 2 wasn't enough to propel me into finishing the series, and I won't be coming back to it. This is a wide choose romance fantasy set in like a bygone era that's not specifically tacked down, but feels like it might be sort of medieval-ish times. I did appreciate how they incorporated the wide choose element. It's like funny and silly that this like Queen's line has something that they call the hunger, which means that they take on many different lovers, and in doing this they successfully bring prosperity to their land. It explains why people are so sex positive here, jumps over a lot of barriers in a wide choose style relationship just to start. That said, this is the 3rd book series I've read by Kathryn Moon, and it's nowhere near the quality of the Sweets verse, which is just really lovely and pleasant the whole time, but it's nowhere near as terrible as Tempting Monsters is either. Like, to me, Tempting Monsters is just straight smut with no emotions, relationship, plot, or character building. Here, I feel like this story walks a tightrope act between being something that's like more character building, emotional, to something that's like just kind of like smutty and there for the steamy times. Like, the characters here are individual enough and interesting enough that I wanted to learn more about them, wanted to see how their relationship build. But I think what really holds this book back for me is the overarching plot. I really don't like that the sister is like this big bad guy. I'm not a big fan of the way the hunger manifests in our protagonist being so dramatically different than everyone else in her line up to now. And in this concept that like maybe the queens have lost the purpose of the hunger or how to use it appropriately. I think it could have been good, but the way magic works in this world is really wishy-washy and fast and loose with the rules. So that makes it like kind of hard to follow or accept or do anything but have like a million gajillion questions in the back of your head. Also, the villains are so mustache twirlingly evil for no apparent reason. That was really frustrating to me too, which is why this is sitting at like a 3 stars and is going to be an unfinished series within my collection. Next is going to be Claiming Fawn by Winter Storm. This is like an Alpha Omega verse dragon shifter kind of story, and it was just like a little bit too weird and unexplained for me to put higher than 3 stars. I don't necessarily dislike the relationship or any of the ideas that are introduced, but I also don't 100% understand how any of them work. You have to do like the whole Alpha Omega relationship situation. Then there's like a mage girl versus a dragon shifter girl, and there's like some rules and society things there. And then this mage person is doing some form of sex work that's both dominant and submissive in ways that don't entirely gel or feel 100% thought out. On top of that, with all sex work and all books ever, we're always asking like, is this something the person willingly chose to do? Or is this like a force or destitution scenario? And as this is a romance story, you're kind of expecting it to be like healthy, and it's implied many times in the book that there are plenty of healthy models of this, that this is a normal thing, and assuming you do it in these ways is good. But it always ends up in these kind of stories that for our character specifically, even though this is a sex positive situation and totally fine, it's not for them and it's a thing they didn't really want to do or have any other choices on. Why go to the trouble of establishing a world where sex work is mostly voluntary and mostly something people do because they want to do it, and then make it specifically that for our character though that's not the case. And it kind of like sours any potential of romance and power dynamics there just to start. And the other thing that was a little bit hard for me on this is Claiming Fawn is billing itself as a sapphic romance, which is supposed to be, you know, female, and specifically in like an Alpha Omega verse story, it's a little bit rare to get a female alpha. And while there are like some mechanics in play and what that looks like, it's always fun to see a depiction of that in a book, at least for me. And in this case, what being a female alpha meant was that you happen to have a cock and it just like comes out for sexy times. Which, you know, fine. Gender and sex are 2 different things, and usually like the alpha, omega, beta is like another secondary sex characteristic on top of that. So you have like the genitals you're born with, you have gender as a social construct, and then like a secondary sex characteristic in these worlds, right? But I'd be lying to say that I didn't feel a little bit baited when it comes to the sapphic element of this romance. And moving into 4 stars, The Midaserse Book 1 and 2 by Lyra. So first things first, there is a ton of potential content warnings and triggers for this. Our main character, Indy, has a very severe eating disorder that's gone way beyond a dangerous, potentially deadly point by the time we meet them. And all the guys in the Midas pack have recently suffered a significant military attack and injury. So like one of the guys is missing his hand, another one is so much in the throes of depression and self-hatred they're not getting out of the bed. And then another one of the guys who was always sort of like on the edge of being 100% mentally there seems to have teetered off entirely and often has like a lot of flashbacks or like misunderstanding about what's real and what's not in the world around them. Not to mention that the guy who's lost his hand also has post-traumatic stress disorder and has flashbacks and has phantom pains and all of that kind of stuff. So I can see a lot of issues in the book that might be hard for some readers, and additionally I can't speak to whether or not everything was portrayed like super well and accurately. In fact, there are a couple of elements I can pinpoint that's probably a little bit troubling or a little bit of a bad portrayal. But still, like, the writing was really good. I thought that the issues they were struggling with and how they were still trying to come together in a relationship was pretty engaging. The Alpha Omega universe created in this duology specifically felt fresh and new to me. It is set in like our world evolved and there's like a secret society of like alpha and omegas living alongside us with like a separate government and stuff, kind of similar to like a Ministry of Magic situation in the Harry Potter world. And the way that one would like transition from one to the other, like surprise, turns out you're not a beta, you're an alpha or an omega after all, was kind of fun and like walks the line between that like dystopian element that seems to be involved in a lot of these alpha omega stories and just like being like very stringent and strict. I thought all of the characters were unique and decently developed, some of them more than others. I do think as a why choose relationship that it struggled in fully developing all the characters and relationships that meant something amongst them. But to be fair, this duology is fairly short and it has a lot to tackle with all of these different issues that each one of them is dealing with, the different problems within like the established pack relationship as well as between this Omega girly who comes into the situation. I think the one thing that really annoyed me about it is there's this larger world situation of like feral alphas coming out and attacking the mainstream government here. The guys get hurt in one of these attacks and people don't really believe them. A separate attack happens. They get called in because it's the same people and they've abducted 3 different omegas. One of them's killed, one of them's retrieved, and one of them remains missing at the end of this duology. We never get closure on that attack, why these feral alphas are attacking, what happened to this one girl who's just missing. Like, it feels like they had this bigger plot point that they wanted to bring in, realized they didn't have enough time, and just like let it fade out into the distance so we could focus on the relationships. It's really funny because I feel like this larger world plot isn't needed at all and doesn't make any sense in the story, except that we did need it as a reason why this pack was attacked and hurt. And I'm wondering if we could have done this better with just like some kind of accident in the front, and then we wouldn't have had to deal with this larger world building thing we just dropped at the end of the game. Next is going to be Gilded Wings by Jaymin Eve. This book probably deserves 3 stars for its troubling elements, but I'm giving it 4 because I had a good time with it, and the things that were problematic are pretty much expected to be there based off of what I've read from Jaymin Eve before. If we're going to compare this book very briefly to the Shadow Beast Shifter series that she's blown up for, I think this is like a better take on what's pretty much the same as that. We'll see in book 2 because book 2 is where the cracks really started to show in Shadow Beast Shifters, and book 3 things went off the rails and weren't fun anymore. But so far, like, book 1 is pretty fun. It's a decent premise that is similar but different to what we experienced in Shadow Beast Shifters. Here, our girl seems to be right now, knock on wood, although I can already predict this isn't the case, fully human. And she gets like brought into like this fairy world, partially by her friend, partially by where she's working. She becomes instrumental to like powerful, important people there. And because of that, like her life is in danger and she has to help them with this mystery and maybe figure out if their relationship is real or not. Jaymin Eve doesn't usually do why choose series, so I assume that some of the love triangles and stuff we're setting up now are gonna end with just like one guy being the right guy, which is disappointing to me because almost all of her stories have a scenario where I can see it going why choose and being really fun. Maybe she'll surprise me and this time we will go that way with more than one love interest, or possibly right now like the dragon shifters are posing as quote unquote fallen gods among the fae, and it would be cool if we found out that each one of these dragon shifters is just like a different incarnation of the same dude, like that had been separated out magically when he fell from his original realm, and that part of the story is we're gonna reunite them into one whole person. Because all of the like incarnations of dragon shifters have like one major characteristic, like this guy's the light-hearted guy and this guy's the serious guy and this one's the angry one. So it would be fun if we found out that those are all just parts of a whole and we reunite them into one person, and that's like why multiple of these dragon shifter guys think that this one girl is their true mate. But I mean, we'll see where the story goes. We really don't have a lot going on in this one. To be fair, I skimmed this hardcore because there is so much freaking exposition I don't care about and don't know that I'll ever need to care about to make this story work. In that way, I feel like it could have done with like several drafts and several beta readers cutting things out for Jaymin Eve. But stuff that like she's done that shows to me that she's learning as an author, for example, is the best friend is now one of the people with power, so it's going to make sense for her to go along on this journey with her. So the best friend isn't just like a hype man in the beginning that we have to keep bringing back in because we mentioned her in the beginning. Also, we didn't have to deal with like our main character going through a lot of abuse in the front end of this story the way we did in the front end of the Shadow Beast story. She still has a chip on her shoulder and like a tragic past or whatever, and it's slightly different than the kind of tragic past we got in Shadow Beast Shifters. But I think we're only gonna have to like hear about it when it's relevant and maybe do a couple specific scenes instead of getting like a whole bunch in the beginning. And this girl's mostly the same girl that we got in Shadow Beast Shifters, except the one in Shadow Beast Shifters had a lot more like pep in her step and fight and was like a lot more capable. And this one is like a lot goofier and just out there being a manic pixie dream girl. I don't dislike it, but it is very tropey and like very silly. So that's definitely something you have to be aware of going in. So far, as far as like the dragon shifter element goes, I like the growly nature of the dragons. And last will be The Least of My Scars by Stephen Graham Jones. This book was gross and made me really squeamish almost the entire time I read it. Not just that our character is a bad character or that they're doing graphically icky things on page, but also they're like very mentally unstable and an unreliable narrator, so you're not even like confident you're reading like this gross, grimy stuff for a reason while you're reading it. And you're not like entirely sure what's going on, why it's happening, if anything that's happening is of value or real. So all of that made me like not happy while reading it. And you might assume that I've incorrectly put this at 4 stars given all of that unpleasant dislike of reading it. But the thing about it is I think you're not supposed to like reading it. You're not supposed to like being in this guy's head. In that regard, it's done quite masterfully. And two, like how often are you supposed to really enjoy liking hanging out with a mass killer? Like they can't all be personable and just entertaining and a good time like Dexter. Not to mention, I feel like the ending of this book pays off a lot of that discomfort and unpleasantness. I don't want to talk about the ending too much because it is a twist, and I do think like experiencing it real time is part of the value here. It reminds me of a movie that's really popular and famous and a classic, which I also won't mention because it'll immediately give away the twist. But like if you compare this book to that movie, I think this book pulls the twist off better and does a better job humanizing everyone involved and making you feel all of the feelings instead of just being visually cool with like a icky twist. So I think really like the comparison of superior execution between this book and that movie, the way the twist happens and what that means about everything I've read so far, brings this into a 4-star, even though it's something I hesitate to recommend to people. Like I would really only recommend this book to certain people and only after talking to them for a little while before it would come up. It definitely makes you feel all 196 of those pages while you're reading. Let's just put it that way. And that's going to be everything that I read this past December. Did you guys have a favorite book this past month? Tell me what it was and why in those comments down below. I hope you guys had a great 2023 and are really excited for new things in 2024. And as always, keep reading. Bye!